Morning and welcome everyone. This is the plastic packaging tax cartons breakfast briefing. Today we will go over a presentation on PPT with you for the carton sector, and we'll have the opportunity for you to ask questions and queries about PPT. When it comes to the question and query section, if you could either use the hands up icon and we will kind of indicate to you if you can ask your question live, or put your question in the chat box for an answer from the team. Now I'll hand over to John Clark, General Manager of BPF Cartons.
Thanks, Mika, and good morning, everybody. Hope you've all enjoyed your tea and toast this morning. So if we could move on to the next slide, Mika, please. We'll get there eventually. Right. I'm going to talk this morning in terms of how the UK plastics packaging tax will apply generally, and then last couple of slides with relation to the carton industry specifically. And then, as Mika's already said, we'll be open for questions at the end of the session. So next slide, please. So what's actually changing? A new plastics packaging tax, PPT as it's commonly known, will take effect from Friday the 1st of April. So April Fool's Day, and that's actually less than 3 weeks away. So it is looming, not so much on the horizon, but it's very much in eyesight now. And the tax that'll apply from the 1st of April will apply to any plastic packaging items that don't contain a minimum of 30% recycled content. Now, first difficulty actually comes in that packaging should only contain recycled content where it's permitted to do so under other regulations. So, for example, food safety. So where it's forbidden to actually use recycled plastic in direct food contact, then HMRC have deemed that the tax will be payable. We have actually questioned the morality behind that one, but like most taxes, the decision has been made. So that's what actually happens. The tax will actually be levied at the rate of £200 per metric ton on qualifying plastics. Now, this is a UK plastics packaging tax, which is different to the UK plastic packaging levy. The UK plastic tax literally will only apply in the UK, which includes Northern Ireland. The EU plastics packaging tax, which is at the rate of €800 per tonne, will not apply in the UK at all. So next slide, please. The idea behind the tax from the government is that it'll actually increase the demand and use of recycled plastic, thereby reducing the amount of virgin plastic used and diverting waste plastic from landfill or energy from waste. Whether or not it'll actually achieve its objectives remains to be seen. So who will actually pay the UK plastics packaging tax? If you manufacture or import 10 or more tons of plastic over a rolling 12-month period, you'll need to register for the tax. And this is regardless of whether or not you will actually have to pay any tax. You'll have to keep records, and in most cases register for the tax, even if all the plastic packaging you manufacture or import contains more than the 30% recycled plastic. Now, imports are obviously covered by this, and it includes the packaging that's already filled. So if, for example, you've got a plastic bottle filled with a drink, then the tax will apply, but only to the weight of the bottle itself. So next slide, please, Mika. So even if you manufacture or import less than 10 tonne of plastic packaging over a year, over a 12-month period, you'll need to keep records of the packaging you manufacture or import. Now, plastic packaging is assumed not to meet the recycled content test unless it can be proven that it does. So HMRC are passing the buck very much over to the manufacturer or the importer to prove that the plastic has more than 30% recycled content. If you can't prove it, then it's caught by the tax. And an example of how the tax will work. So if you manufacture 10 ton of plastic packaging and 1 ton of it contains less than 30% recycled plastic, then you'll pay tax on the 1 ton and you'll pay the £200 a ton. Now, online service to register and pay will be available from the 1st of April. So you can't actually register at the moment. Now you've got 30 days to register after you meet the criteria. Now there's 2 tests, the forward-looking and the backward-looking test, surprisingly enough. And rather than go into great detail on this webinar this morning, in terms of the registration, I would suggest that you look at the government HMRC collections page, and the link for that is at the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So what is plastic? So plastic's a material consisting of a polymer other than a cellulose-based polymer that's not been chemically modified, to which additives or other substances may have been added. HMRC are being very wide in the net that they are applying to the definition of plastic. So bioplastics, including biodegradables, compostable, and oxo-degradable plastics, are all subject to PPT. And again, I mean, a lot of work has gone in the carton industry in terms of looking at PLA as being a substitute for plastic, but HMRC are or have defined already that PLA will be regarded as a plastic. So next slide, please. So when is the tax actually chargeable? So the tax is payable by a manufacturer or importer, and the tax is due when the component is finished. Now, the definition of finished is that it's completed its last substantial modification before packing or filling. Now, finished is when it's undergone its last substantial modification, even if waste or surplus material remains attached to it. But tax is not payable on the waste or surplus material. So printing is actually regarded as a substantial modification. And if this is the last substantial modification that the packaging actually undergoes, then the liability is with the printer. Now, this is particularly important if we have any members that are actually printing on plastic, because the chances are that the printing process will be the last substantial modification and the liability will lie with the printer. So next slide, please. Now, what is a definition of a substantial modification? It's one that changes the shape, the structure, the thickness, or the weight of the plastic packaging component. Extrusion, molding, layering and laminating, forming and printing are all manufacturing processes that are regarded as substantial modification. And that is not an exhaustive list. So other processes will actually fall under the remit of being a substantial modification. However, blowing from a preform, cutting, labeling, and sealing are processes that are not regarded as being a substantial modification. And that is an exhaustive list. As BPIF, we have lobbied long and hard with regard to the fact that very late in the process, HMRC defined that printing was going to be regarded as being a substantial modification. Unfortunately, at this point in time, HMRC will not change their view because they're saying that the printing process actually increases the weight of the plastic packaging component, even though we've argued that the word substantial is certainly not met by the printing process. But we will keep doing our best to see if we can get HMRC to change their mind. It won't be in the immediate future, but hopefully as they review the tax over the coming years, we will be able to get them to change their mind. So next slide, please, Mika. Now, this is important for laminated carton board. So packaging that contains multiple materials but contains more plastic by weight than any other single substance will be plastic packaging for the purposes of the tax. And this is the example that HMRC actually use in their literature. So if you've got a 10-gram item of packaging that's made of 4 gram plastic, 3 grams of aluminium and 3 grams of cardboard, then all 10 grams will be considered plastic packaging for the tax. And in that instance, it's because plastic is the predominant material. But if that 10-gram item contains 3 grams of plastic, 4 grams of aluminium and 3 grams of cardboard, then none of the item is taxable. If the weight of plastic is equal to another single material, then it's not considered plastic for the tax. So as I said earlier, so polycoated, Metpol, laminated carton board are not covered by PPT because the plastic is not the predominant material. Next slide, please, Mika, again. However, the onus is again on the supplier, manufacturer. So we need to demonstrate to HMRC if a component which contains plastic isn't subject to the tax because it doesn't actually contain more plastic than any other material. And if you can't demonstrate it, then the component is treated as entirely plastic. So record keeping will be critical and information flow up and down the supply chain. Next slide, please, Mika. Now, PPT is not payable on any waste product. So it's not payable on production waste, but you have to inform your supplier before the event so that they can reduce the amount of PPT that they charge. So for example, if you've got 5 rolls of film that you're buying in, and we tell a supplier in advance that 3 rolls are used for product A with 15% waste, and 2 rolls for product B with 25% waste per roll, then PPT that the supplier will charge the customer is due on 85% of the weight of the 3 rolls and 75% of weight on the 2 rolls. Now, there is no facility to reclaim PPT if goods are scrapped after the final substantial modification has taken place. So, for example, if you've got a quiche carton, and I come to the question of windowed cartons later on, if you've produced the carton, it's sitting in your warehouse, and then the product is delisted, then unfortunately there is no way to reclaim any PPT that has been paid on that particular product. And it's been made very clear that only the entity that actually paid the PPT can reclaim the tax. Now, we had a webinar last week with HMRC as part of the BPIF's interaction with the Treasury. And there was a query that was raised with regard to unexpected high levels of waste and could they be retrospectively claimed. Originally, we were told not, but as I said, a comment was made in the webinar last week, which might allow us to be able to do that. But as you can see from the example, the communication up and down the supply chain with regard to PPT is going to have to be very, very good to minimize the effect of the tax on businesses. I mean, it's going to be in everybody's interest to ensure that the communication is good to reduce the level of taxation paid. So next slide, please, Mika. So are there any exceptions to the tax. There are certain categories that PPT will not apply. So plastic packaging manufactured or imported for use in the immediate packaging of a medicinal product. So for example, if there's a plastic bottle that the human medicine is actually contained, then that will not be subject to PPT, but the label that goes on the bottle will be. And if the product is veterinary or whatever, then again, PPT will apply. It's a human medicinal product. Now, transport packaging used on imported goods, that's actually an area of greyness, I think is probably the politest way of describing that again. And we are, again, going to seek clarification on this particular point from HMRC, because originally the view was that transport or tertiary packaging would not apply to goods that are being imported, because it clearly says in the government communications that you do not need to account for it on your tax return as long as it's either road, rail, ship or air container, but packaging component that is used to both transport multiple sales units or grouped packaging and prevent damage during transportation. So that's what made us think that pallet wrap around sheets of board would be exempt, because, for example, you might have 1,000 sheets on a pallet, so it's a multiple sales unit. But conversely, if there's only one product on a pallet, example, one reel, then PPT would be payable. But where the confusion is now coming in, and this isn't the first point of confusion that we've had with PPT, the guidance then goes on to say the exemption does not apply to normal packaging around a sales unit or normal packaging around a number of sales units. So the clarification that we're now trying to seek is, would the wrap around a pallet of sheets be regarded as being normal packaging, in which case the exemption wouldn't apply, or is it regarded as being transport packaging for multiple sales units? As soon as we get an answer, we'll obviously let you know on that particular point. Just in terms of responses from HMRC, they have been taking quite a long time, and some of the points are contradictory, but we'll do our best to get an answer within the next 3 weeks. There is another exemption regarding packaging used as aircraft, ships and rail stores. So if you're going on an international flight or whatever, or on Eurostar, then again, there's exemptions around the plastic packaging there. And components that are permanently designated or set aside for other than a packaging use. Now, examples of that are, inhalers for Ventolin or products like that, printer or toner cartridges, water cartridge filters, sales display shelves, shop fittings, long-term storage, for example, toolboxes, first aid boxes, earphone or earbud cases, and there's quite a long list of products that are exempt from PPT. And again, I would refer you to the communication section of the HMRC plastic packaging tax website for more definitions. Further exemption, which may be relevant to our industry, is where plastic packaging is exported, the payment of PPT can be deferred or even reclaimed. So if goods are actually exported, then no PPT is actually payable. But there are certain rules about the timescale, the evidence that you have to give in terms of actual exportation. And again, I would encourage you to look at the various rules that HMRC have actually come up with. So next slide, please, Mika. One of the catch-alls of PPT is that there's joint and several liability. So that if you do not account for the tax that you supply to businesses, including fulfillment houses, those businesses may be found to be secondarily or jointly and severably liable for any unpaid tax. What that basically means, if we're buying product from an importer or a manufacturer of plastic packaging, and the liability for the tax lies with that importer or manufacturer, then if they don't pay the tax, then HMRC could come looking for us to actually pay any unpaid tax. Now, originally, HMRC were going to have a requirement that the amount of PPT tax paid on invoices from the 1st of April had to be shown on invoices. That has been delayed to an unknown date. Whilst it's obviously great that, you know, it means that at the moment you haven't actually got to change IT systems, it does actually leave companies open or more open to the fact that, you know, if your supplier isn't paying the tax, then HMRC could come looking for you. I think the reality is that will only apply, certainly in the short term, is if there's deliberate efforts being made to avoid the tax. What it would suggest is that you actually write to your suppliers for them to confirm to you if the product that they're supplying actually contains more than 30% recycled content. And if it doesn't, then that they are actually paying the tax. And please keep those letters for your records. So next slide, please, Mika. So some real life examples. Whoops, can you go back one, please? Here we go, thank you. The stretch film around a pallet. It is definite that transit packaging for UK produced products will be subject to PPT. So if you're buying stretch film or whatever to go around your pallet, then the manufacturer or the importer of the film is liable for the tax if it doesn't contain the 30% recycled content. So your supplier or importer should pay the tax, and what is likely to happen is that the supplier will increase their price to you to offset the PPT that they've paid. Now, a windowed carton, PPT is payable on the plastic window within a carton because that's been deemed by HMRC to be a separate plastic packaging component, even though it's part of the carton. So the manufacturer of the window is actually liable, but again, is likely to pass on the increased cost to the carton converter, who in turn likely to pass it on to the packer filler, because I can't imagine that there's too many converters that are going to gladly suffer the increased cost of PPT. Now, the difference there again is if that window is actually printed by the carton converter. I can't think of too many instances where the window would be printed, but if it is, then the liability actually moves from the manufacturer of the window to the printer. And in that particular example, what you've got to do is you've then, because tax is only payable once when the product is finished, you then have to inform your supplier that the tax point has moved, and you would actually request a credit for the PPT that has been paid by the manufacturer. It's only the manufacturer or the importer that can actually reclaim the tax from HMRC, i.e. the person who's paid the tax is the only one that can reclaim it. Now, in my real life examples there, as I've already mentioned, laminated carton board is exempt from PPT, where the plastic is not the predominant material. So in summary, I think compared to other parts of the printing industry, for example, labels, the carton industry is getting off relatively lightly, albeit PPT will impact on the industry because of, as I've already mentioned, stretch film, the vinyl tape, the brown tape, strapping that goes around pallets. They will all be subject to PPT unless they contain the minimum of 30% recycled content. So most converters will actually be paying PPT, albeit not directly, but through the supply chain. So next slide, please, Mika. All of this comes with a government health warning in that, as I've mentioned several times, we're seeking clarification from HMRC. The advice that we've been given is what we've actually been telling members, but a lot of the information that has been coming through the webinars and the guidance is actually sort of changing, even though we're only weeks away from the start of the tax. And depending on who actually answers the question from HMRC, there have actually been inconsistencies. But we're doing our best to actually come up with definitive answers to the various queries that have been raised. So next slide, please, Mick. So where do you need to look to for help? BPIF's got a dedicated area on the website, and we've also got a PPT help email. So if there are questions that you think about after the webinar or at any time, please email the helpline and we'll do our best to get back to you. That may not be an immediate response, because I say if we have to seek guidance from HMRC, then we're dependent on their response time. I would recommend you go to this particular website, the HMRC website, and it's the collections page. The email address, sorry, the web address is there, and that's where all of the information is being collated by HMRC. That information is being regularly updated, and again, we're doing our best to keep abreast of the changes. You can actually email the HMRC direct email address, which is indirecttaxdesign.team@hmrc.gov.uk. If you are actually emailing HMRC direct, providing there's nothing confidential about your question or the answer, we would really appreciate if you would share that response with us, so that the more knowledge we have, it certainly helps us in answering any member queries. So last slide, please. Thank you very, very much for listening for the last half an hour in terms of PPT. Hopefully it's helped. If it has actually raised any more questions, then please let us know, and we'll do our best to answer. I've got a team of experts helping me this morning, so we'll do our best. So have we got any queries, Mika or Darren?
Yeah, John, yeah, 2 questions have come in, so thanks very much for that. If I'll just raise the questions on the chat line here. A message from Kim. Does cellulose-based polymer mean that cellulose acetate windows are tax exempt?
I think all we could ask there, Kim, is if you can send me the information from the supplier in terms of spec sheet or whatever, we will forward it on to HMRC and get them to decide yay or nay in terms of if they regard it as being a plastic and subject to PPT.
Absolutely. Okay. Is that okay, Kim? If John, yeah, it's John.Clark.
No, sorry, I've just seen a message from Kim saying the supplier isn't responding.
Well, I think that Kim, if you can get the information over to John, I think John will interpret the information So I guess it's the spec sheet from the supplier that's key at this stage, isn't it?
Or if you email me separately, Kim, I'll ask the question, because normally HMRC want to know as much information as possible before they will actually give an answer. But they may be happy enough just with the very broad definition, but usually the more information the better.
Yeah. So I'll just check that's the same question. Thanks, guys. That's great, Kim. Thank you. And a question from Robert: if board is imported via boat, is the tax applicable? I think it's the comment used as ship store.
No, the ship store doesn't actually relate to transport packaging. I have actually been dealing with Robert separately on this particular item, and the comments that I'd given to Robert, several weeks ago, was that I thought that pallets of board, as I've already mentioned, would be exempt because of it actually being transporting multiple sales units or grouped packaging and prevent damage during transportation. But the query has now been raised by this statement saying this exemption does not apply to normal packaging around a sales unit. So would HMRC actually regard, as I say, the stretch wrap or the shrink film around up 2,000 sheets of board or paper as being normal packaging, in which case it would not be exempt, or if it's regarded as being grouping packaging multiple sales units, then it would be. And again, Robert, as soon as we have an answer on that, we'll certainly respond to everybody.
And a question from Jonathan: if all the plastic we use is exempt, so either for lamination or over the 30% recycle threshold, do we still need to register and declare this?
Yes, if you're a manufacturer or an importer, then you need to keep records. If you go over the 10-ton threshold, you'll actually need to register. You'll need to submit your information to HMRC on a quarterly basis. But if the products are all exempt from PPT, then you won't actually have to pay any money over. I've got a horrible feeling in all of this that the administration is probably going to be as onerous, if not more onerous, than the actual payment of the tax itself, because the whole supply chain is going to have to work in a way that it's never worked before. In terms of, you're going to have to tell your supplier what products, are going to be used. A further example that I can use is that, if you've got an acetate window supplier supplying, let's say, 10 tons to a converter, through COVID, the converter went into producing PPE. So out of that 10 tons of material that's being supplied, if 5 tons of it is for PPE, then immediately that is not subject to PPT because it's not packaging. And then the remaining 5 tons would be subject to PPT. And that's where the question of production waste comes in. So to prevent you being charged for the whole 10 tons of PPT, then you will have to tell your supplier that I'm going to use half of it for face masks. Now, again, that's something that wouldn't have happened in the past. There is talk that contracts could be amended to allow for this information flow up and down the chain. But where it's going to become very, very difficult is if you've got the huge multinationals where they're providing, sort of packaging that'll have more than one language on it, including English. They technically should tell the supply chain that, out of the 100,000 components that they've produced, 50,000 of them have stayed in the UK that are subject to PPT, but 50,000 have actually been exported. All I'd say is good luck. in trying to get that information.
Sure. And worth reminding, of course, that you only register when you hit the 10-ton threshold using the look forward and later on onto the look back process. So it doesn't mean it doesn't need a mass registration on the 1st of April. You need to assess your volumes at that stage using the methods on the website. Yeah,
as I say, the look back and the look forward methods are the ones that you need to look at for the 2 tests. Now, because the tax only starts on the 1st of April 2022, the look back test will work differently for the first 12 months, in that you will only need to look back to the 1st of April 2022. So if you're producing plastic components in March now, March 2022, that doesn't count. It's only what you do from the 1st of April.
Absolutely. And a question here from Robert: if we are an overseas business bringing material into the UK, do we pay the UK tax or the UK-based recipients?
It's who is actually importing the goods. So if you actually import the question is who takes first title in the UK. If it's the board mill or the merchant, then they are liable for the PPT. If it's technically the converter who is importing the board, then that liability would fall to them, because they would be classed as being the importer of that material.
Absolutely. And the question from Nikki: if you import pallets or reels which have shrink wrap, then at a later point export part of them, would you be liable for the tax again when you export?
PPT does not apply to exports. So if you wrap it in the UK from UK manufactured shrink fill, then you would be able to go back to your supplier and tell them that out of the 10 ton of shrink film that they've supplied you, 5 ton of it is being used on exported goods. They can then claim the PPT back on the 5 tons, and then they would need to credit you for the PPT on those 5 tons, assuming, of course, that they've actually increased their cost to you for the PPT.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm just thinking more of with regards to like, say we bring reels in for Sweden,
yeah,
and we convert them, and then we send them out, say, as pallets or reels again somewhere else. I'm just wondering, is there liable to be like a double tax?
No, tax is only ever payable once, Nikki, on this.
Okay.
So the first question is that the material that's coming in from Sweden. Question: do you actually have to pay PPT on that? In the first instance, if it's classed as being transport multiple sales units or grouped packaging, and preventing damage during transportation, then it's exempt, unless HMRC decide that is, the film around the board is regarded as being normal packaging around the sales unit. So that's where the big question mark has literally come up in the last few days, with regard to the impact on the board mills and the merchants, and potentially the converters in terms of imported raw materials, bearing in mind 90% of the carton board that we use in the UK is actually imported. It's actually a very, very important decision that HMRC will have to make.
Okay, thanks.
Unfortunately, the confusion of the 12 and 24 months as well, isn't it? You're treated differently in the first 12 months.
Yes, yeah, in terms of exports and being able to defer the tax. If you know that material is going to be directly exported within 12 months, then you can defer the tax. And if it's within 24 months, then you can claim it back, or that's a position that we think is the case at the moment.
Yeah.
I think with all of this, it's been pretty obvious that there's been a lot of answering questions on the hoof, in terms of, we've asked questions of HMRC, and we could virtually see them thinking, oh, we never thought of that one in the tax design process. So they come up with an answer, and I'm sure that when the tax becomes live in 3 weeks' time, there will be a lot of circumstances that people hadn't thought about. And again, we're hoping that HMRC take a softly approach in terms of guidance, rather than actual, sort of coming in with size 9 boots and charging people for sort of exemption or avoidance of the tax. I think the only exception to that will actually be where there's deliberate attempts to avoid paying the tax, in which case, probably quite rightfully, HMRC will come down heavily on those particular companies.
Of course. A question from Paul around when the invoice declaration becomes legal requirements, which obviously is not from the 1st of April, and whether BPF will help with the wording for members. I think that's a definite yes, isn't it? This part we see ongoing for probably 12 months plus, because we believe there's a review process after 12 months. So we'll be moving from supporting and interpreting the rules at this stage to implementation, to administration reporting and statements as this tax develops, I think, over the next year or so.
Yeah, one of the biggest dangers that I think we all face in this particular process is the tax is being set at £200 per tonne at the moment, with the aim that the government is looking to increase the reuse of recycled plastic. If that aim is not met, then you can see a scenario when the tax is reviewed 12 months, 2 years, 5 years down the line, that if the aim isn't being achieved, then the tax rate will actually go up over the coming periods. But that is one of the big unknowns at the moment. All we can work on is that it's £200 per tonne, where it's less than 30% recycled content. But I think, sort of what you need to be doing in the short term is getting letters out to your suppliers of shrink film, of window cartons, of windows, etc., saying, does the product contain more than 30% recycled content? If it does, great. If it doesn't, then please confirm that you will actually be paying all the necessary PPT.
And that's the last of the questions at this stage, John.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. If you do think of anything when you're sitting down with your mid-morning cup of coffee, then please, sort of contact the PPT helpline or contact me directly.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us today at this breakfast briefing. As John said, contact us with your questions and queries at ppthelp@bpf.org.uk. We have a PPT hub on the website underneath the environmental roadmap page. So do go there, don't hesitate to check out any sort of guidance that we have. We will send the recording of this breakfast briefing and the presentation with some key links to government information to you via email. And the next PPT activity that we think you should engage in is the PPT clinic on the 11th of April. So hope you all enjoyed this update and have a great day.